I noticed when I worked in Germany that the people I worked with were very formal towards me, and they'd call me Miss Hamilton instead of my first name, Mary. And yeah, I thought they were quite direct, but actually the language they used was actually very polite towards me, so it wasn't so much of an issue. The other thing that I noticed was about food. I normally eat my main meal at the end of the day, but the Germans normally have their main meal at lunchtime. So if I went over to someone's house in the evening, I normally got bread and cheese, and I love bread and cheese, but I often felt hungry.
When I worked in Japan, there were a lot of cultural differences that I noticed, especially in the way that people communicate. People were very, very polite, and because there was a language barrier, it was quite difficult for me to understand what people were trying to tell me quite a lot. I think that also the food was very, very different. That was something that I had to get used to over time.
The differences between the United States, where I was born, and the United Kingdom, where I now live, are large and small differences. The language is the same, but it's also very different. American English is a different form of English to British English, and because I do communications, I am often being told about those differences. There are social differences as well, and they exist as differences in this country. So people in the South here tend to be a bit more reserved than Americans are. People in the north of England are very friendly, like Americans are, typically. People in Scotland are different again and lovely. But I think the biggest difference may be in the environment. The British protect their environment with green space legislation, and they protect their cities and towns with how they can be developed for houses. And in America, that's very different. And so the amount of concern and community feeling in Britain is superior, I think, to that of America.
I worked in Sweden for 2 years, and one of the things that I noticed was a different attitude to working hours. For example, in the summer, people tended to work shorter hours to make more use of the daylight, and in the winter they would work longer hours, and they were very good at keeping to their hours. Another thing was meal times. People tend to start work very early, and they would have breakfast extremely early, and lunch during the working day would be as early as possibly 11 o'clock, and the evening meal at about 5 or 6 o'clock, and that was much earlier than I was used to. Another thing was levels of formality. People tended to dress very casually, very informally at work, but when they went out in the evening, they would often dress up, put on a smart dress or a jacket and tie, and that was very different to, well, it was the opposite really to my experience of working in the UK.
They did. I changed my eating habits to fit in with the German working day. I changed straight back as soon as I got back to the UK, though.
I definitely got used to Japanese food, and I really enjoy Japanese food now, so that did change. I think that the etiquette and manners over there are very, very good, and that didn't change.
Well, when I first came to live in the UK and lived in Scotland, my first impressions were very much about trying to understand what people were saying, because the accents were very, very different. And in England, I would also listen to the accents. Having lived here 7 years now, I take a lot of the accents for granted, and I don't hear them as well as I used to. So that's one big difference.
I don't think they changed. I think my attitude towards them probably changed. I got more used to them, and they became much more normal. So I got habituated to them, I suppose.